My sister, the family's golden child, stole my entire business plan. So I watched quietly as she confidently pitched it to investors, not knowing I'd replace the core data with. The air in the boardroom was the expensive kind, chilled to a precise 68 degrees and smelling faintly of polished mahogany, expensive leather, and the quiet, predatory scent of ambition. From my self-appointed station in the corner, tucked behind a ridiculously large fiddle leaf fig that probably had its own trust fund, I watched my sister, Sloane, work the room. She wasn't just mingling, she was conducting. A dazzling smile here was a crescendo for the venture capitalists. A light, reassuring touch on the Armani-clad arm of our lead potential investor was a diminuendo, calming his unasked questions. She was a master painter, and her medium was people. Today, she was painting her masterpiece on a canvas of our family's desperation, coloring the executives with shades of admiration and unwavering trust. She was radiant, confident, the sun around which our family's dying business was supposed to orbit for one last, glorious spin. And I, her younger sister Karis, was the ghost in the machine. The invisible architect of the solar system. The one who built the sun. Sloane was about to present Project Phoenix, the multi-million-dollar business plan I had poured 2 years of my life, my soul, into building from the ground up. Every sleepless night spent wrestling with logistics algorithms, every sacrificed weekend lost in a labyrinth of market projections, every single line of code in the financial models that were the bedrock of this entire venture, it was all mine. My DNA, my very essence, was woven into the fabric of the presentation she held on a ridiculously small, jewel-encrusted thumb drive in her perfectly manicured hand. As she laughed, a sound like sparkling wine, at a dry joke from a silver-haired man with a shark's grin, her eyes, the same shade of cornflower blue as mine, briefly met my gaze over his shoulder. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible glance. It wasn't a look of shared conspiracy or even a flicker of sisterly support. It was pity. The kind of look you give a loyal but simple-minded dog waiting patiently by the door, unaware it's about to be left behind. She truly believed this was her coronation, the moment her innate, effortless genius would finally be recognized and rewarded. She had absolutely no idea that I had not only built the throne she was about to sit on, but I had also meticulously engineered the trapdoor hidden directly underneath it. You see, this wasn't just about a stolen business plan. That was merely the symptom. The disease was so much deeper. This was about my mother's legacy. Mom was the heart, the soul, and the brilliant, beating pulse of Hearthside Provisions. She was the one who turned simple, honest ingredients from our family farm into bottled magic. After she was gone, my father and Sloane took her vibrant, authentic creation and embalmed it. They turned it into a hollow brand, all glossy labels, empty marketing buzzwords, and dwindling profits. This presentation, this elaborate, high-stakes trap, was my one and only shot to reclaim what was rightfully hers. To perform a resurrection. My name is Karis, and this is the story of how I let my sister present my life's work, with a ticking time bomb hidden deep inside its code. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to give your city a shout-out. In the grand, unwritten mythology of the Devereaux family, there were always two daughters, a binary star system with one star destined to burn bright and the other to remain a cold, distant satellite. Sloane, at 35, was the firstborn, the golden child, the one who emerged from the womb seemingly prepackaged for greatness. She possessed our father's easy charm and a smile that could disarm a firing squad. She was anointed successor to our family business, Hearthside Provisions, before she could even properly spell CEO, a fact our father, Arthur, loved to recount at dinner parties. And then there was me, Karis, 32. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the numbers girl who found more comfort in the elegant logic of a spreadsheet than in the messy art of small talk. I was the ghost in the back office, the silent, tireless engine that made my sister's shiny, impressive sports car actually run. Hearthside Provisions had once been something truly special, a testament to my mother, Alara. She wasn't a businesswoman, she was a culinary artist, a kind of kitchen alchemist who could coax poetry out of a blackberry bush and bottle sunshine in the form of lemon curd. I remember watching her as a child, her hands dusted with flour, humming a soft tune as she worked, her movements a dance of instinct and love. Her recipes were the company's foundation, her spirit infused in every jar of jam and every loaf of artisanal bread that left our farm's kitchen. She built this company not on market research, but on the simple, radical idea that good food, made with love, could make people happy. But after a brief, brutal fight with cancer took her from us 10 years ago, the light of the company went out. Our father, Arthur, a man who loved my mother deeply but never truly understood the source of her magic, was lost in a sea of grief. He handed the reins to a 25-year-old Sloane, believing her charisma was the cure-all for a company whose heart had been ripped out. Sloane's strategy was to trade substance for style. She saw her mother's legacy not as something to be preserved, but as a brand narrative to be exploited. She poured money we didn't have into expensive rebranding campaigns orchestrated by slick city consultants who spoke in a baffling jargon of synergistic brand actualization and leveraging authenticity. The rustic, charming labels my mother designed were replaced with sleek, minimalist ones that looked like they belonged in a museum, not a pantry. The website became a masterpiece of modern design, full of beautiful photos of Sloane looking pensive in a wheat field, but the soul, the warmth, the very essence of what made us special, was gone. Sales plummeted. We were drowning in debt, kept afloat only by the lingering loyalty of customers who remembered what we used to be, and by the quiet, frantic work I was doing behind the scenes to streamline logistics and cut costs wherever I could without anyone noticing. Project Phoenix was my desperate, last-ditch effort to save us. It was a comprehensive, meticulously researched plan to pivot the company back to its authentic roots, while simultaneously modernizing our operations. It was a plan built on data, not buzzwords. I worked in secret at first, in the quiet hours between midnight and 5 a.m., fueled by stale coffee and a burning, obsessive need to fix what my father and sister were so elegantly breaking. When I finally had a working draft, I took it to the one person I thought might understand, my Uncle Grant, my mother's younger brother and the original co-founder of the company. He'd retired years ago, cashing out his shares after a bitter argument with my father over the company's direction. He now ran a small, successful organic vineyard a few hours away. He read the 30-page document in silence, his brow furrowed, his wineglass untouched on the table beside him. The silence stretched, thick with my unspoken hopes. When he finished, he looked at me, his eyes, so like my mother's, filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Your mother's spirit is gone from this place, Karis," he said, his voice a low rumble of frustration. "Your father, he only sees the glitter. He's forgotten that the gold was always in the ingredients, in the work. He's let Sloane turn your mother's legacy into a fashion accessory." He tapped the thick folder. This is the first thing I've seen in a decade that feels like her. It's not just a plan, it's a philosophy. It's brilliant." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, pinning me in place. "But he'll never see it coming from you. He'll dismiss it. So, listen to me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you ever figure out a real plan to get this in front of people who will actually understand it, you come to me. I've been saving for a rainy day, and from the looks of it, there's a hurricane on your horizon. I mean it, kid." His words planted a seed of hope, a tiny, dangerous flicker in the suffocating darkness of my family's expectations. He saw me. He saw what I was trying to do. And he was offering me a lifeline. To understand why I would detonate a bomb in the middle of my own family, you have to understand that the theft of Project Phoenix wasn't a single act of betrayal. It was the grand, inevitable finale of a lifetime of them. It was the last acquisition for my private, silent museum of pain, a collection of moments curated in the quiet corridors of my memory, each one a testament to the slow, methodical art of being erased. The first exhibit is a memory from my 16th birthday, a moment forever bathed in the golden, hazy light of a late summer afternoon. Sloane and I are standing on the front lawn, surrounded by family. For all our differences, we were superficially twins in almost every way that doesn't matter, same dark hair, same cornflower blue eyes. But on that day, the difference was made starkly, brutally clear. In the driveway sat a brand-new, cherry-red convertible, a comically large bow perched on its hood. It was for Sloane. My gift, presented a few moments later, was a large, heavy box containing a top-of-the-line computer, powerful, practical, and profoundly beige. Our father, Arthur, clapped us both on the shoulder, his voice booming with a pride that was clearly not divided equally. "Sloan needs to be out there, making connections, being the face of the future," he announced to our assembled aunts and uncles, who all murmured in agreement. Then he turned to me, his smile softening into something more placating. "And you," he said, giving my shoulder a squeeze, "you're happy in your room with your projects, right? You'll build the amazing things that Sloan will one day sell to the world." He said it as if he were bestowing upon me a sacred, noble calling. But all I heard was my life sentence, delivered without the possibility of parole: "You are the support, not the star. You are the engine, not the driver." Our Aunt Vivian clasped her hands together, her eyes shining. "Oh, Arthur, it's perfect. A car for the star, and a tool for the thinker. You know your girls so well." I remember nodding, forcing a smile, and spending the rest of my party in my room, not building amazing things, but charting the vast, lonely territory of my own disappointment. The next exhibit is a single, glossy magazine page, framed and hung in the hallway of my mind. It's from 5 years ago. I had spent a month obsessively combing through my mother's archives and discovered a half-finished recipe for a spiced plum chutney. The notes were chaotic, the measurements imprecise. It was more of a culinary puzzle than a recipe. I spent weeks in the test kitchen, long after everyone else had gone home, tweaking, testing, and finally, perfecting it. It was a masterpiece, complex and surprising, and it became our bestseller overnight, winning 2 prestigious local food awards. A regional lifestyle magazine decided to do a feature. I stood in the test kitchen, my apron still dusted with a faint cloud of cinnamon and cardamom, my hands smelling of roasted plums. Sloan arrived for the interview 20 minutes late, dressed in a crisp designer dress, looking like she'd just stepped out of a catalog. The reporter, a young, eager woman, asked Sloan about the inspiration behind the chutney. Sloan placed a hand over her heart, her eyes misting over. "You know," she began, her voice catching with perfectly rehearsed emotion, "it was a difficult time. I missed my mother so much. One night, I just came in here, to her kitchen, and I felt this presence. I felt like she was guiding my hand, telling me what to add. It wasn't me who created it, really. I was just a vessel." The reporter was captivated. I stood just out of the frame of the camera, a silent, invisible witness to this breathtaking act of historical revisionism. The article came out a week later with a full-page photo of Sloan holding up a gleaming jar of the chutney, her face a mask of thoughtful creativity. I was in the background, a blurry, out-of-focus figure by the stove, mentioned only once in the caption, Sloan Devereaux, with her sister and assistant, Karis, in the kitchen where the magic happens. Assistant. The word was a slap in the face, a public demotion in my own life. I had cooked the magic, she just showed up to take the credit for the spell. The final, and perhaps cruelest, exhibit in my museum is the quietest. It's not a single moment, but a memory of a single spreadsheet from last year, a silent testament to a crisis averted. I was doing a deep dive audit of our financials, a task Sloan found monumentally boring, and I discovered a catastrophic error in her accounting. Her sloppy, superficial bookkeeping, a series of miscategorized expenses and unlogged invoices, had left us exposed to a massive IRS penalty, a 6-figure sum that would have been the final nail in the company's coffin. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I didn't tell anyone. Who could I tell? Telling my father would have caused him to have a heart attack. Telling Sloan would have resulted in a storm of denial and blame-shifting. So I did what I always did. I fixed it. I worked for 72 hours straight, fueled by nothing but caffeine and adrenaline, untangling the digital spaghetti, refiling documents in the dead of night, and using every bit of my financial acumen to restructure things just enough to make the problem disappear. I felt like a bomb disposal expert, sweat dripping down my back as I snipped the last wire with seconds to spare. There was no fanfare, no thank you. The crisis was over before anyone even knew it had begun. At the next quarterly meeting, my father, reviewing the clean, accurate reports I had generated, clapped Sloane on the back. "A remarkably smooth and profitable quarter, sweetie," he said, beaming. "You've really got a handle on the financial side of things now." Sloane just smiled, a picture of serene competence, and accepted the compliment. She never once acknowledged the ghost in the machine who had just saved her, and all of us, from her own catastrophic incompetence. Each memory was a brick in the wall that had been slowly, methodically built around me, a wall designed to keep me in my place. The theft of Project Phoenix wasn't just one more brick. It was a wrecking ball. And it was aimed right at me. The final cut, the one that severed the last, frayed thread of my misplaced loyalty, came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 3 days before the investor pitch. It was a day like any other, gray and overcast, the kind of day that seems designed for bad news. I was walking from my small, cluttered office towards the kitchen to refill my coffee mug for the 4th time, my mind churning over last-minute details for the presentation notes I was preparing for Sloane. As I passed the small, glass-walled conference room, I heard their voices, my father's deep, confident baritone and Sloane's bright, polished tones. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob to the main hallway. I told myself I was just taking a break, but I knew I was eavesdropping. They were rehearsing. Sloane was pacing back and forth in front of the whiteboard, while my father sat at the head of the table, playing the role of the skeptical investor. And so, by leveraging a dynamic, multi-channel approach, Sloane was saying, her voice dripping with the kind of corporate jargon she had picked up from expensive consultants, we can not only recapture our core demographic but also achieve significant penetration into new, emerging markets. Good, my father murmured. Strong. Confident. But what about the numbers, Sloane? They'll want to see the hard data. And then I heard it. The verbal dagger slid between my ribs so cleanly I barely felt it go in. The real heart of the plan, of course, is the financial model, Sloane continued, her voice taking on a falsely modest, almost conspiratorial tone, as if she were letting him in on a secret. Honestly, I was up all night for a week wrestling with it. It was a beast, Dad, truly. But I finally cracked the supply chain algorithm. She let out a small, theatrical sigh. By restructuring our distribution network based on my predictive analysis and optimizing our inventory management through the new system I built, we can increase our net profit margin by a minimum of 12% in the first year alone. She was reciting my work. Not just the conclusions from my executive summary, but the very language I had used to describe the process. My predictive analysis. The new system I built. She was telling him the story of my work, my struggle, my breakthrough, and seamlessly, flawlessly, casting herself as the hero. I had to lean my head against the cool wood of the doorframe, the ceramic of my mug suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. My own breath caught in my throat. I could picture my father in there, his face alight with a deep, paternal pride. And sure enough, his voice boomed through the door, thick with adoration. "That's my girl. A true visionary. I always knew you had it in you, Sloane. You just needed the chance to really spread your wings and take charge." He chuckled, a sound that made my stomach clench. Durand Ventures won't know what hit them. "You've got this, sweetie. You've got this." For a fleeting second, I heard him ask, "And Karis is all caught up? She understands the data well enough to support you if they ask any technical questions?" There was a brief pause. "Of course," Sloane said smoothly, her voice like honey. "I've walked her through the top-line numbers. She's a great support, but let's be honest, Dad. This kind of high-level strategy is my world. She's happier in the weeds." The casual cruelty of it, the effortless way she dismissed me, was what broke me. It wasn't just that Sloane was stealing my work. It was that my father was so eager, so desperate to believe her. In his perfectly constructed world, it was more plausible that his charismatic, brilliant daughter had spontaneously developed a genius-level grasp of logistics and financial modeling than it was that his quiet, reliable younger daughter had been the architect all along. To him, I was a function, a tool, a useful part of the background scenery. Sloane was the artist. The idea that the tool might have conceived of and created the masterpiece was simply beyond the scope of his imagination. The words hit me not with the hot flush of anger I might have expected, but with a sudden, arctic cold. This wasn't just taking credit, this was a fundamental erasure of my existence, of my contribution not just to this project, but to the past decade of my life spent quietly keeping our family's legacy from crumbling into dust. I stood there for a long moment, the forgotten coffee growing cold in my mug, the world narrowing to the muffled sounds of their mutual admiration society. Then, with a chilling clarity, I turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say to them. There was only something left to do. I didn't go back to my desk. I walked on autopilot, my feet carrying me down the creaking hallway, past the humming kitchens, to the one place in the entire building that felt like a sanctuary, the old recipe archive room. It was more of a large, walk-in closet than a room, tucked away behind the main pantry, a place no one but me ever entered. It was dusty and smelled of old paper, dried lavender, cinnamon, and the slow, steady march of time. The shelves were lined with dozens of my mother's handwritten notebooks, her elegant, looping cursive detailing a lifetime of culinary creation. This was the real heart of Hearthside Provisions. This was the soul my father and sister had so carelessly forgotten. I slumped onto a small wooden stool, the one my mother used to sit on, and looked at my reflection in the dusty, age-spotted glass of a framed photo of her. She was young in the picture, probably not much older than I was now, caught mid-laugh, a smudge of flour on her cheek. I saw my own face superimposed over hers, a pale, haunted ghost, my eyes wide with a pain so deep and so old it felt like a part of my bone structure. For a moment, a wave of raw, volcanic fury threatened to consume me. It was a physical sensation, a heat that started in my belly and spread through my limbs, making my hands tremble. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into that conference room, to throw 2 years of research files and spreadsheets onto that polished mahogany table, to watch the color drain from their faces as I exposed Sloane for the fraud she was. I imagined the scene with a vicious, satisfying clarity, my father's sputtering denial, Sloane's smooth, practiced excuses, how she'd twist my righteous anger into an act of petty, jealous sabotage. And then what? The vision soured. The outcome was as predictable as the sunrise. It would be my word, my data, my frantic, emotional truth, against the lifetime of carefully constructed narrative that was Sloane, the golden child. It would be a messy, ugly family drama that would end with me being labeled as unstable, hysterical, and ungrateful. I would lose. In the court of my father's opinion, I always lost. A voice, insidious and familiar, whispered in my head. It sounded chillingly like my father's, the voice of 1,000 quiet dismissals and gentle corrections. Your support, Karis, not the star. You're good with the details, but you don't have the vision. You're too sensitive. For years, I had let that voice become my own internal monologue. I had accepted my role as the ghost, believing, with the pathetic hope of the perpetually overlooked, that if I just worked hard enough, quietly enough, eventually, my value would become self-evident. I had been waiting for a recognition that was never going to come. My gaze drifted from my own reflection back to the photo of my mother. I reached out and wiped a streak of dust from the glass. Alara Devereaux had been a force of nature, brilliant, passionate, and utterly, gloriously unapologetic. She never waited for permission to be great. She never asked if her ideas were good enough. She simply knew they were, and she brought them to life with a fierce, joyful determination. I got up and walked over to a small wooden chest in the corner. It held her most personal notebooks. I opened it, the scent of old paper and dried herbs washing over me. On top was a small, leather-bound journal. I opened it to a random page. Her cursive filled the page, but at the bottom, she had written a note to herself, underlined twice. The world will only value you as much as you value yourself. Don't wait for them to set the price. Reading those words, in her hand, was like a jolt of electricity to my soul. It was a message from the past, a piece of advice I desperately needed to hear in the present. The anger inside me didn't vanish. It simply changed. It cooled, it hardened, and it was forged by the heat of my grief and fury into a tool. It became a crystalline resolve, as clear and unyielding as a diamond. I had been waiting for them to set my price, and they had priced me at 0. Fine. I would set my own price. And I would make them pay it. I would no longer be the ghost in the machine. I would be the god in the machine. I would let Sloane walk onto her stage. I would let her speak my words. And then, with the surgical precision she had always mistaken for meekness, I would pull the plug. The woman who stared back at me from the glass now was different. The hurt was still there, etched deep, but it was overshadowed by a cold, hard light in her eyes. The ghost was about to learn how to haunt. That night, the office was a tomb, wrapped in the profound silence that only descends after the last employee has clocked out. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the servers in the closet and the rhythmic, almost violent, clicking of my keyboard. Each keystroke was a small, satisfying act of rebellion, a tiny piece of the intricate mosaic of my revenge. I wasn't destroying something, I was forging. I was an engineer building a beautiful, complex machine whose sole purpose was to self-destruct at the precise moment of my choosing. My first step was to secure the masterpiece, the genuine article. I opened the file for Project Phoenix, the real one. 40 slides of flawless, irrefutable work. I spent over an hour triple-checking every data point, every chart, every projection, tracing the logic of every formula. I lingered on the final chapter, the one I had never shown Sloane or my father, the part of the plan that was entirely my own. It was a proposal for a new product line called Alara's Pantry, a premium collection dedicated to my mother's most personal and ambitious unreleased recipes. It was the soul of the project, the part that would truly make us unique again, and the part that I knew, with absolute certainty, Sloane had either forgotten or never bothered to read. I saved the entire, perfect presentation onto a sleek, silver USB drive that I had bought specifically for this purpose. I slipped it into the zippered pocket of my purse. It felt cool and heavy against my fingertips, like a key or a weapon. Next, I turned my attention to the Trojan horse. With a feeling of cold, deliberate purpose, I navigated to the company's shared server, to the folder where I'd left a file clearly labeled Phoenix Working Draft. I knew my sister's work habits, or lack thereof. She was pathologically lazy when it came to details. She would never build her own presentation from scratch. She would copy and paste, probably 15 minutes before the meeting, trusting that my work was, as always, impeccable. I opened the file and began to meticulously, lovingly, corrupt it. I was an artist of sabotage. I didn't just delete things that would be too obvious and might prompt her to actually call me for help. Instead, I replaced the complex, data-rich, interactive charts with static JPEG images of the same charts. They looked identical at a glance, but if you clicked on them, nothing happened. On each one, in a tiny, 4-point font at the bottom corner, a font so small you would never notice it unless you were looking for it, I typed the word placeholder. I severed the links to the appendix, so none of the underlying data was accessible. I rewrote a few key sentences in the executive summary, replacing my clear, data-driven language with her preferred brand of vague, fluffy corporate jargon. Then came the centerpiece of my trap, the logic bomb. It was my Mona Lisa of malicious code. On the main financial projections slide, I re-engineered the spreadsheet. It had been a thing of beauty, a dynamic model where changing one variable would ripple through and adjust dozens of others. I rebuilt it as a delicate house of cards. I created a web of intentionally circular and interdependent formulas, a digital snake eating its own tail, all of it held in a state of suspended animation by a single, unprotected input cell at the top, which I labeled manual override, projected margin %. I knew the investors would ask about profit margins. It was the most basic of due diligence questions. And I knew Sloane, not understanding the intricate mechanics of the model, would be forced to invent a number and plug it into the only available input cell. The moment she typed anything into that cell and hit the enter key, the formulas would trigger a cascade failure, a digital meltdown that would turn the entire, beautiful grid of projections into a screaming, chaotic sea of glaring red error messages, #REF. 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 It was, I thought with a grim satisfaction, a work of art. My final move, as the clock on my computer ticked past 2 a.m., was my insurance policy. I opened my email and composed a new message to my Uncle Grant. I attached a password-protected, read-only copy of the real, perfect presentation. The subject line was simple and professional: Project Phoenix Final Backup for Archiving. In the body, I wrote, "Hi Uncle Grant, as promised, here is the final version of the pitch deck for your records. It's the culmination of everything we talked about and the best path forward I can see for Mom's company. Fingers crossed for Thursday. Karis." I hit send. The timestamp on that email, sent from my official company address, nearly 72 hours before the presentation, was my alibi. It was my undeniable, locked and loaded proof of authorship. I leaned back in my worn office chair, the silence of the building pressing in on me. The trap was set. The bait was laid. And the golden child, blinded by her own arrogance, was about to walk right into it. For the first time in a very, very long time, I smiled. And it was not a nice smile at all. The morning of the presentation, I dressed with the deliberate, strategic care of a soldier preparing for battle. I bypassed the power suits and sharp blazers in my closet. Instead, I chose a simple, well-tailored navy blue sheath dress. It was elegant but unassuming, the kind of outfit designed to be overlooked, to fade into the background. It was my camouflage. I was not there to be seen, I was there to watch. When I entered the boardroom 5 minutes early, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it, a tableau of corporate power dynamics. My father, Arthur, stood beside Sloane near the head of the table, his face a mask of nervous pride. He was a handsome man, but anxiety had etched new lines around his eyes. He was betting the entire family legacy on this meeting, and on the daughter he had always believed in. Sloane herself was a vision in a crisp, brutally expensive white blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She radiated a confidence that was so complete, so unshakable, it was almost hypnotic. She was already laughing and chatting with the team from Durand Ventures, who had just arrived. The team was led by a woman named Ms. Durand. She was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper haircut in a sharp, modern bob, and she wore a pair of ruthlessly intelligent glasses. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of polite, intense scrutiny. She scanned the room with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, her gaze assessing, calculating. She was flanked by 2 younger associates, a man and a woman, who mirrored her serious, all-business demeanor. I felt a flicker of professional respect for her. This was not a woman who would be swayed by a dazzling smile or a well-turned phrase. She would care about the numbers. And the numbers, I knew, were my secret weapon. I took my usual seat in the corner, far from the center of power, opening my laptop and pretending to review my notes. My hands were steady, but inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat of anxiety and exhilarating, terrifying anticipation. This was it. Years of quiet frustration, months of meticulous planning, all came down to the next 60 minutes. There was no turning back. "Good morning, everyone," Sloane began, her voice as smooth and bright as a polished stone as she took her place at the podium. She clicked the first slide onto the massive screen behind her. "I'm Sloane Devereaux, CEO of Hearthside Provisions, and I'm here today to introduce you to the future. A future of growth, innovation, and a return to the authentic principles that made us great. I call it Project Phoenix." I had to give her credit, she was a brilliant performer. She moved through the first few introductory slides with the effortless grace of a seasoned actress. She spoke of our company's storied heritage and the untapped potential in their artisanal food market. She used all her favorite words: synergy, disruption, paradigm shift, leveraging authenticity. It was all meaningless, a beautiful salad of corporate jargon, but it sounded impressive. My father watched her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated adoration. The Durand Ventures team seemed engaged, nodding politely, their faces neutral. From the outside, it was a flawless performance. Sloane was the very picture of a modern, visionary CEO. But I, from my hidden vantage point, could see the truth. She was the captain of a beautiful, majestic ship, sailing confidently into the open sea, completely unaware of the massive, jagged reef lurking just beneath the placid surface of the water, a reef that only I could see, because I was the one who had built it. And the tide was going out. The performance continued its smooth, impressive trajectory for another 10 minutes. Sloane was in her element, painting a vibrant picture of a revitalized Hearthside Provisions, a company poised for explosive growth. She was charming, she was witty, and she was utterly convincing. And then, she clicked to slide 12, Market Analysis. The placeholder image appeared on the massive screen behind her, the slightly blurred chart, the almost invisible text in the corner. A flicker of something, confusion, annoyance, crossed Sloane's face. It was a minuscule crack in her polished facade, so small that only someone watching as intently as I was would have noticed it. For a fraction of a second, she hesitated. I saw the internal calculus in her eyes, acknowledge the error and risk looking incompetent, or power through and hope no one noticed. Her ego, vast and unshakable, made the choice for her. So, as you can see from this data-rich overview, she said, gesturing vaguely at the meaningless, static image, the key market indicators clearly point towards significant challenges and emergent opportunities in the current landscape. Ms. Durand, who had been listening with a polite but detached expression, leaned forward slightly in her chair. She adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes narrowing at the screen. "I'm sorry, Ms. Devereaux," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority that sliced through Sloane's practiced charm. "The chart is a bit unclear from this distance. Could you walk us through the specific Q3 data points that support that claim of emergent opportunities?" The air in the room shifted. The ambient temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Sloane's smile tightened at the edges. "Of course," she said, though a single, telltale bead of sweat had now appeared on her temple, just below her hairline. The key takeaway from the third quarter is that consumer engagement, particularly in the digital sphere, is trending upwards at a significant rate. She quickly clicked to the next slide, a desperate, clumsy attempt to change the subject. But Ms. Durand was a predator who had scented blood in the water. She wasn't going to be distracted by a shiny new slide. She let Sloane continue for another 2 slides, reeling off more meaningless platitudes about brand identity, before she struck again. They were now on the financial projections overview slide, a top-line summary that was intentionally vague. "Hold on," Ms. Durand said, cutting her off mid-sentence. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the effect of a gunshot in the quiet room. "Let's go back to the core model. Before we talk about hypotheticals, I need to understand the fundamentals. What is your projected net profit margin for year 3 under this new strategy?" It was the question. The simple, direct, inevitable question I had been counting on. The one question that Sloane, for all her charisma and bluster, had no possible way of answering truthfully because she had never bothered to learn the answer. Sheer, unadulterated panic flashed in Sloane's eyes. She glanced desperately at my father, who just gave her an encouraging, clueless nod. She looked back at the screen, at the complex spreadsheet she didn't understand, a foreign language she had never tried to learn. She was trapped. She did the only thing a performer can do when they forget their lines, she improvised. "A very solid 15%, she said, pulling a number out of thin air, trying to make it sound definitive. She turned to the laptop on the podium, her hands shaking almost imperceptibly as she fumbled with the trackpad. "Let me just plug that in here to model out the specifics for you." She navigated to the manual override cell I had so helpfully left unprotected at the top of the slide. She typed 15 into the cell. And she hit the enter key. The effect was instantaneous, digital, and catastrophic. On the giant screen behind her, the entire grid of neat, orderly numbers, the beautiful architecture of my financial model, dissolved into a chaotic, screaming sea of glaring red. #ref. 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 The error message, the digital scream of a broken machine, replicated itself across every single cell. It was a complete and total system collapse, a visual representation of a life falling apart in real time. A collective, audible gasp went through the room. One of the junior associates literally dropped his pen. My father's jaw dropped, his face turning a pasty shade of gray. And Sloane. Sloane just froze, her hand hovering over the laptop, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She stood there, bathed in the red glow of her own failure, as the silence in the room became deafening, thick, and suffocating. The golden child had finally, irrevocably, stumbled. And her fall was more spectacular than I could have ever dared to imagine. The silence in the boardroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sloane stood at the podium as if she'd been turned to stone, her face illuminated by the accusing red glow of the screen. My father looked from the screen to his daughter and back again, his expression a comical, tragic mixture of confusion and dawning embarrassment. He looked like a man who had just discovered the masterpiece he owned was, in fact, a cheap forgery. It was Ms. Durand who finally broke the spell. Her face was a blank slate, utterly devoid of emotion. She calmly looked down at the hard copy of the proposal summary she'd been sent, the one I knew Sloane had printed from my original file. She ran a single, perfectly manicured finger down the first page. "This document," she said, her voice cutting through the thick, awkward silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, "states on page 2, under Project Team, that a Ms. Karis Devereaux was the lead analyst and architect of this financial model." Her sharp, intelligent eyes lifted from the page and scanned the room. They passed over my father, passed over the other investors, and landed directly on me, hidden in the relative shadows of my corner. "Perhaps you," she said, her voice level, "can shed some light on this catastrophic failure." It wasn't a question. It was a command. A challenge. Every head in the room turned. In an instant, I went from being the invisible ghost to the sole focus of a dozen pairs of eyes. I could feel Sloane's venomous, panicked glare on me, my father's bewildered, pleading stare. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but as I pushed my chair back and stood up, a strange, profound calm washed over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a certainty as solid as the ground beneath my feet. This was my moment. The one I had both dreaded and meticulously planned for. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Yes," I said, and I was pleased to hear my voice come out clear and steady, without a tremor of fear. "I can." I walked from the corner to the podium. The short distance felt like miles. I didn't even look at Sloane as I walked past her. I could feel the heat of her humiliation and rage radiating off her. I reached the laptop, calmly pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket, and with a steady hand, unplugged her jewel-encrusted thumb drive and inserted my own. The screen flickered. The sea of red vanished, replaced by the title slide of my presentation. The real presentation. It loaded, flawless and detailed, onto the screen. I took my place at the podium. And then, I began to speak. I didn't just present the numbers. I told the story behind them. I told them the story of my mother's legacy, of honest ingredients and real quality. I explained, with a passion and depth that Sloane could never fake, how my plan would not only save the company but would honor that legacy while making everyone in this room a lot of money in the process. When I got to the final chapter, the one titled Alara's Pantry, and revealed the new product line based on my mother's secret, unreleased recipes, I saw a flicker of genuine, predatory interest in Ms. Durand's eyes. I wasn't just selling a business plan. I was selling a soul. My soul. And for the first time in my life, I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were buying it. If you've made it this far, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you're on this journey with me, and your support means the world. Please comment the number 1, and let's finish this story together. When I finished my presentation, the room was silent for a beat, a different kind of silence than before. This one was filled with contemplation, not shock. And then Ms. Durand did something I didn't expect. She started to applaud. It wasn't a polite, perfunctory clap. It was slow, deliberate, and resonant in the still room, a clear signal of approval. Her team, taking their cue from her, followed suit. She stood up and walked over to me, her hand extended. "Ms. Devereaux," she said, and there was no ambiguity about which Ms. Devereaux she was addressing. That was the most impressive, well-researched, and frankly, passionate pitch I have seen all year. You didn't just present a plan, you presented a vision. She glanced over at my father, who looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour, and at Sloane, who was standing stiffly by the wall, trying to make herself small. Ms. Durand's voice dropped, becoming firm and non-negotiable. "My firm's offer of $2 million is on the table. But it is contingent on one, non-negotiable condition." Her sharp eyes locked back onto mine, and I felt the full force of her will. "You lead this project. You run the rollout. You are in charge. The board will answer to you, and you will answer directly to me. Is that crystal clear?" "Crystal," I said, my voice not wavering as I shook her firm, dry hand. The deal was done. As the room began to clear out, the Durand Ventures team buzzing around me, talking excitedly about next steps and timelines, my father finally seemed to stir from his stupor. He approached Ms. Durand, his voice weak. "Of course, Sloane will be working closely with Karis on this," he began, a pathetic attempt to salvage some dignity for his favorite daughter. "She has a real talent for—" Ms. Durand cut him off, not unkindly, but with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Mr. Devereaux," she said, "with all due respect, what I just witnessed was a lack of talent. It was a lack of preparation and a lack of integrity. My investment is in your younger daughter, and in her plan. Her team will be her decision." She then turned her back on him and resumed her conversation with me, a dismissal so complete it was breathtaking. The final act of the drama unfolded by the door. As I was gathering my things, Sloane cornered me. Her face, drained of all its usual vibrant color, was a pale, tight mask of pure, distilled fury. "You," she hissed, her voice a low, shaking whisper, so that only I could hear. "You did this to me. You set me up. You planned this. You humiliated me." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the filter of years of resentment and perceived inadequacy. And I felt not anger, but a profound and weary finality. The tectonic plates of our lives had just violently shifted, and she was standing on the side of the chasm that was crumbling into the sea. "No, Sloane," I said, my voice calm and even. "I didn't do this to you. Your own incompetence humiliated you. Your own laziness set you up." I took a step closer, lowering my own voice to match hers. "You tried to steal my work. You tried to steal my future. And worst of all, you tried to steal Mom's legacy and turn it into a cheap, hollow knockoff of yourself." I held her gaze, letting the weight of 2 decades of unspoken truth settle in the air between us. "I didn't do anything to you," I finished, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "I just finally gave you the credit you have always, truly deserved, for nothing." I turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. I left her standing there, speechless for the first time in her life, a fallen star in a universe that had just fundamentally rearranged itself. The conversation was over. The boundary had been drawn, not in sand, but in solid rock. And for the first time in my entire life, I was standing on the right side of it. The fallout was swift, seismic, and deeply satisfying. That evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment, the adrenaline of the day finally beginning to fade, my phone rang. It was my Uncle Grant. "I heard a rumor that a phoenix rose from the ashes in a boardroom downtown today," he said, and I could hear a broad, proud smile in his voice. A real, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in what felt like years. "You could say that," I replied, feeling a lightness I hadn't realized was possible. It was quite a show. "Well, the show's not over. It's about to get better," he said, his tone shifting from celebratory to strategic. "Ms. Durand's firm has already been in touch with my lawyer. They're ready to wire the funds as soon as we have a new corporate structure in place. There was a pause, and I could hear the rustle of papers. And speaking of that, I have some news of my own. Remember that competitor who made a lowball buyout offer for your father and Sloane's shares last week? The one they were reluctantly considering? Vaguely, I said. The memory was hazy, just another piece of the background noise of the company's slow-motion collapse. Dad mentioned it. Said it was an insulting offer but might be their only way to avoid total bankruptcy and walk away with something. Well, Grant chuckled, a dry, rumbling sound. That competitor, Northwood Acquisitions, was a holding company I set up 2 months ago through my lawyer. I was just waiting for the right moment to make a move. I sank onto my sofa, the phone suddenly feeling heavy in my hand. I was stunned into silence. What? I finally managed to whisper. I saw this coming for years, Karis, he said, his voice softer now. I saw what they were doing to your mother's legacy, and I saw what they were doing to you. I couldn't intervene directly, not with Arthur being so stubborn. But I could prepare a lifeboat. He cleared his throat. The offer is generous, Karis. It's more than their shares are worth in the company's current state. It gives them a graceful exit, a way to save face and walk away with their heads held high and their pockets full. It lets them maintain the narrative that they chose to sell. And it gives you, he paused for effect, letting the weight of his next word land. Everything. Complete control. The company is yours, free and clear, if you want it. A clean slate. To rebuild it the right way. Your mother's way. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in my eyes. Not tears of sadness or anger, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. It was over. The long, silent, lonely fight was finally over. Thank you, Uncle Grant, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. God, thank you. I want it. The next morning, the corporate transition happened with the clean, swift efficiency of a military coup. An email went out to all Hearthside Provisions employees announcing that the company had been acquired by Northwood Acquisitions. A second email followed an hour later, announcing Sloane Devereaux's immediate resignation to pursue new and exciting opportunities. Finally, a third email announced Arthur Devereaux's retirement, effective immediately, and the appointment of Karis Devereaux as the new president and CEO. The old guard was gone. A new order had begun. That afternoon, I walked into the large corner office, my mother's office, then Sloane's, and for the first time, it felt like my own. The ghost had finally taken her seat at the head of the table. 6 months have passed since the day of the presentation, a day I now refer to in my head as the reckoning. The transformation of Hearthside Provisions has been profound. It turns out that when you stop spending money on buzzwords and start investing in quality ingredients and efficient processes, people notice. We're not just solvent, we're profitable. We've rebuilt trust with our old suppliers, the ones my mother had worked with for years, and we're on track to open 2 new retail locations by the end of the year. The crown jewel of our revival is Alara's Pantry. The product line I unveiled in the presentation, the one based on my mother's most cherished recipes, has become a runaway success. It's as if customers were starving for something real, something authentic, and we were finally giving it to them. The spirit of my mother, her joy and her passion, is finally back in the building. I feel it every day when I walk through the kitchens and smell the familiar, comforting sense of my childhood. Last week, I was doing a final clean-out of the last of the files from Sloane's tenure in the large corner office, which is now my much more modest and functional workspace. Tucked away in the back of a deep desk drawer, beneath a pile of old, glossy marketing brochures featuring her face, I found something. It was a single piece of heavy company stationery, folded in half. It wasn't an apology. I knew better than to ever expect one. It was something more honest, more true to the sister I knew. I unfolded it. 3 words were scrawled in Sloane's angry, sharp, unmistakable handwriting. You were right. I've kept the note. I have it tucked into the corner of my computer monitor. I look at it sometimes, not as a trophy, not as a reminder of my victory, but as a reminder of a fundamental truth I had to learn the hard way. The loudest voice isn't always the truest one, and that sometimes, the only way to be heard is to let your work, your truth, and your integrity speak for itself. I finally restored my mother's legacy, and in doing so, I finally found my own voice. But now, a new, unexpected chapter is beginning. My father and Sloan have been calling. They're not asking for their jobs back, or for money. They're asking for a second chance, not in the business, but in my life. They want to start healing our broken family. So I have to ask you, the jury of the internet, am I the jerk if I tell them it's too late? Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.